This video is an extension on the distributive property, and it's introducing you to a new challenge called binomial distribution. So if we recall the distributive property, the principle of the distributive property is that you take what's in front of the bracket and multiply it by everything that's inside of the bracket. So for example, A, you'd multiply it by B and get AB, and then A, you'd multiply it by C and get AC. So the question for you then is, what do you do when you have a question like x plus 3 in brackets times x minus 5 in brackets? So now we have a binomial times a binomial. And so I want you just to maybe pause the video and think for a second about how you might solve that problem. And a hint is that you can extend the principles of distribution to that problem. So hopefully you've had a second to think about how you might approach this problem. And basically, you do it in a very similar way to how you do distribution. In a way, what I want you to do is pretend like this just says x times x minus 5. So to do that, you would do x times x, and you'd get x squared. And then you'd do x times negative 5, and you'd get negative 5x. So you would do that if the problem just said x times x minus 5. Well, now we have this extra plus 3. So again, we can do that in a similar way. Let's just pretend it says 3 times x minus 5. So you would do 3 times x, and you'd get 3x, and you'd do 3 times negative 5, and you'd get negative 15. You may have heard of something before called FOIL. And this is a little acronym for remembering how to do binomial distribution. The F stands for first. Take the first term in each and multiply. And so that would be, in this case, your x times your x. That represents your F, or your first. The O stands for outside. So take the outside terms, in this case the x and the negative 5, and multiply them. The I stands for inside. So take the two terms that are on the insides. So in this case, the 3 and the x. Take them and multiply them. And finally, the L stands for last. So take the terms that are the last terms, so the x and the negative 5, and multiply them. So that's essentially what we did over here. Now the only thing that we have to do is we have to collect like terms, because right now these are like terms. So to get our final answer, we have x squared, negative 5x plus 3x is negative 2x, and then we have minus 15. We can't keep going because we don't have any like terms anymore. And that's how you do a binomial times a binomial. So let's do another example of that. So again, in this case, we're going to take our first terms and multiply them. We get 6y squared. Then we're going to take our outside terms and multiply them. And we get plus 4y. Then we take our inside terms and multiply them, and we'll get negative 18y. And we take our outside terms and multiply them, and we'll get negative 12. In a way, if you look at this, it kind of looks like a happy face. I know that that's kind of silly, but we put little eyes there. We have a person that's smiling. So that's another way of kind of remembering. It's like the happy face method. And then again, remember we have to collect our like terms. So we get 6y squared. We get negative 14y, and we get negative 12, and that is our final answer, and that is how you multiply binomials.